BAWSCA Board of Directors. Tonight's date is Thursday, May 16th, 2024. Ms. Sandkulla, will you please call the roll?
Yes. Andrews.
Present.
Bro.
Here.
Bro.
Here.
Chair Chambers.
Here?
Cohen. Dorr.
Here.
Duncan.
Here.
Hamilton.
Here.
Hardy.
Here.
Hindi. Jordan. Lopez. Manalo. She's not here yet. Matachek. Here. Mellinger.
Here.
Mickelson.
Here.
Montano. Here. Piccolotti.
Present.
Pierce. Here. Ragsdale.
Here.
Schneider.
Here.
Stevenson. Stone.
Here.
Vice Chair Vella.
Here.
Weed.
Here.
And Zichterman. And you have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. Please stand for the pledge of allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance. Okay, Director Manalo, is it?
I'll note that you've joined us, Director Manalo.
Okay, next slide, please. Okay, good evening and welcome everyone to BAWSCA's May 16th, 2024 meeting. Tonight we have a long and vitally important agenda. I want to comment on a few specific items. First, the board will consider approving its mission-driven work plan and results to be achieved for the coming fiscal year. As a reminder, our mission is to provide a reliable supply of high-quality water at a fair price to the water users BAWSCA represents in Alameda, San Mateo, and Santa Clara counties. This board action also includes a budget and funding plan to pay for this important work. Separately and importantly, the board will also consider approving the 18 professional services contracts that must be in place by July 1st, 2024, for the agency to begin implementing the work plan. Finally, our CEO has notified the board of her intention to retire this December. Tonight, the board will take the first important step necessary in this transition to begin the recruitment process for a new CEO. Next slide, please. Our next item is the Board Policy Committee report given by Director Hardy. Director Hardy, will you give your report now, please?
Yes, I will. The Board Policy Committee met on May 16th here in this building, and the minutes are attached and accurately reflect what we discussed and the decisions that we came to, recommendations, I should say. The BPC voted unanimously in support of board approval for 2 items on tonight's consent calendar. The contract with Hazen and Sawyer for demand projections, and the amendment with BAWSCA's legal counsel, Hanson Bridgett. BPC also voted unanimously in support of board approval for the proposed work plan, results to be achieved, operating budget, and the funding plan, including the 9% assessment increase. I want the other directors to understand that there was a lot of discussion back and forth, and we came to that 9% as a mostly because it kept our increase at a 1 digit, recognizing that there seems to be a struggle, but also it was a compromise of how much to take out of the reserve funds and how much to put on our agencies. And that was our discussion, and that is the recommendation. Also, I'd like to make the point that our next meeting is June 12th, but it will not be here. It will be at the San Mateo Library in the Oak Room. That's my report.
Okay. Thank you, Director Hardy, for your report. Are there questions from the board on the VPC report? Okay, seeing none. Are there members of the public that would like to comment on the VPC report?
I should get out my sunglasses.
I see none. In the remote location, are there any members of the public that would like to comment on the VPC report? I hear of none. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, consent item, agenda item 4 is consent calendar. Items A through H can be approved by one call for a motion, a second, and a vote, unless any items are pulled for further consideration. Do any members of the board have additional comments or wish to pull an item from our consent calendar? Okay, seeing none. Are there any members of the public that wish to comment on our consent calendar? Seeing none. Any public in the remote location that would like to comment on the consent calendar? Seeing none. Do I have a motion and a second for this agenda item?
Motion to approve. May I do that online?
Yes. That's Director Manalo.
Okay, Director Manalo is the primary motion. Who
I'll
is the
second.
And Director Hamilton is second. Okay. If there are no further board questions or discussion, we'll proceed with the vote. Ms. Sandkulla, can you call the roll, please?
Director Andrews?
Aye.
Bro?
Yes, for Brisbane and GVMID.
Chambers?
Yes?
Cohen? Dorr?
Yes.
Duncan?
Yes.
Hamilton?
Yes.
Hardy?
Yes.
Hindi? Jordan? Lopez? Manalo?
Aye.
Thank you. Matichak? Yes. Mellinger?
Yes.
Mickelson?
Yes.
Montano?
Yes.
Piccolotti?
Aye.
Pierce?
Yes.
Ragsdale?
Yes.
Schneider?
Yes.
Stevenson? Stone?
Yes.
Vella?
Yes.
Weed?
Yes.
And Zichterman?
Yes.
And the motion passes.
Okay, thank you. Next slide, please. Our next item is a report from the SFPUC. Welcome to our meeting, Ms. Kastner. I invite you to give a report now, since I guess Steve Ritchie's not here.
Yeah, thank you. Good evening, Chair Chambers and fellow board members. I am Allison Castema. I'm the BAWSCA liaison for San Francisco. Steve Ritchie is presenting at the Water Education Foundation Bay Delta Tour, which is a 3-day tour. I believe in Walnut Creek tonight, along with East Bay Mud. This is a very typical conflict we run into almost every year when Water Education Foundation does their tours. So it's a very valuable group. They have been spending days touring the Bay Delta and understanding the various constituents who are concerned with issues in the Bay Delta. So I am here tonight to do the update. So our water supply conditions update here through, of course, Sunday, so the 13th. Reservoir storage, we are again in very good condition. What you'll see here is Hetch Hetchy is at 86.3% of maximum storage. Typically at a time, around this time of year, we would see that at about 73.8%. So the system itself is in very good condition. Our water bank, which is that paper account that we have with Modesto Interlock Irrigation District, that's on 100%. We have been sitting at 100% much of the last year, from the wet year last year through this season. So I'll make one mention here. San Andreas is a little bit lower, 69.4%. We're doing some work adjacent to that embankment and the road that we had some damage during winter storms over the last couple of years. So there's some work being done, and that's why we're seeing that at slightly lower than the rest of what we see in this grouping of information. So very good conditions for reservoir storage. And of course, we have issued our letter to, we issue a letter, a final water supply availability letter each year in April, by April 15th. indicating that we are able to provide the 184, the total amount that we would expect to. So moving on, just a picture of across the state is also looking very similar. All of these are very full. The green line is the historical average for each of those different reservoirs across the state. And you can see almost all of them, San Luis is below, but almost all of them are above. So again, good conditions across the state. Drought monitor, we like to show it because it's entertaining to see it change. Very, very little being shown here on this map. This has not really changed much, except to shrink possibly a bit more. Hetchy precipitation, so we are just under the median for the 1991 to 2020 period. So you will see as I move on that we're seeing precipitation above 100%. So upcountry, this is our precipitation. We basically have a total currently of 31.77 inches against a median 12-month, which is 30.92. So we're about 103% of precipitation for the upcountry stations. And in the Bay Area, we're actually at, I believe, 130%, this 29.84 total inches against a normal of, or a median of 23.35. Huge snowpack. We have less of that, but still above the average median. And you see that peaked there in early April, and it's starting to really melt, and we're seeing snow melt coming in, which you can really see here. So this is our water available to the city from the Tuolumne system. The green line is that cumulative as we see snow melt coming in, and the water that is above that top hat, which goes to the Modesto Interlock irrigation districts, who have first right of water on the Tuolumne. Everything above it, that blue line, anything above it starts to add into that green line. So that's good conditions again. Forecast as we're looking forward, very little here, a little precipitation still in the upcountry areas for the 13th to the 21st, and then the week out. So maybe a little bit of precipitation. I think I've seen this, it's less than 1/4 of an inch currently expected. And our total delivery is at 196. So again, starting to climb. This is based on temperature and other things. We always see a climb about April 15th. People start to plant, etc. If it was really wet, we might not see it climb as much because that wet outside basically cuts the outdoor irrigation. So we're seeing an expected climb and looking pretty good for water sales. So that is the last slide on water supply conditions. I have a couple of updates on other items. So we did see the State Water Resources Control Board did a workshop at the end of April. I think you heard about this. We were expecting to see on the voluntary, what's titled the voluntary agreements, or has been described as the voluntary agreements. They're really a voluntary process to come to agreements that can be proposed as the regulation for the State Board Bay Delta process. That was only focused on the Sacramento side. The good things that we saw in those 3 days of workshops was participation and presentation from the various water agencies and other members who basically rely on those rivers for water and for consumption, much like we do. We saw good presentation engagement from the State Board throughout all of that period. So that was the first time I think we've really gotten the State Board to see details about what has been termed voluntary agreement is now termed the agreements to support healthy rivers and landscapes, because that is effectively what it is. It is a balance of those beneficial uses. So the one thing we are continuing to look at, the good news is the Tuolumne side was not part of these presentations. That information was part of the materials prepared and part of the public process put out, but not part of the presentation, because again, we're in 2 phases. We're in the first phase, and this was the second phase, Sacramento side. But we can say the good things that we are seeing is, one, the Tuolumne has critical year water that is dedicated. It is very defined in the voluntary agreement portion that's for the Tuolumne. We had already developed that under the FERC process for Don Pedro. So there's some very defined quantities of information and water that was not part of the Sacramento side, so we can at least point to that. In addition to that, we're just making sure that we are focused on trying to ensure that these are not separated processes. The Sacramento and the San Joaquin both contribute into the Bay Delta, so we're very interested that those processes align as the state board continues to consider those items before them. So I am happy to answer any questions.
Okay, are there questions from the board for Ms. Castema? Okay, I believe it's Maria. That's better, okay.
Director Dorr,
Yep, go ahead.
thank you. My question is, I know we've seen these often, and I just had a question about historical average. I know we used 1991 to 2020, and I'm curious if you also have at your disposal an earlier median, so 61 to 90, to see,
Yeah.
has the median changed over time? I'm curious.
Oh, decidedly, yes. Yeah, hydrology, we certainly have going back for, like, I think to the 40s at least, if not the 20s, on the precipitation and information such as that. But on the actual consumption, we definitely, I've seen numbers from as way back as the 76, 77 drought. We look at that very typically where we have seen, basically decline of demand based on conservation measures that have been, put in place over that time frame. Yeah.
Okay, Director Pierce.
Thank you. Allison, what was the response of the state board when they were talking about the voluntary agreements, even though it was for the other section of the river? What did you see?
So I would say generally, this is the first time that the state board members have seen the details of these agreements in public, in presentation. I think they greatly appreciated that information coming to them. It was a quantity of information for them to consider. I believe that it's just quantity of content that came to them for those workshops, but they seemed engaged. They had good questions. They had follow-up questions in terms of, the Sacramento side has blocks of water that are not as defined as the Tuolumne side. So that was one of the items that was, follow-up questions were asked. I think there's follow-up information to be provided back to them. They did ask also, I think, about implementation, or the idea of the agreements being and or with regulation, and the reality, which was reiterated from those presenting. The voluntary agreements will be the regulation. If they are adopted, those voluntary agreements, that voluntary process to bring a solution forward, it will become, if adopted, the actual regulation that the state board would then be enforcing. So that was most of it. There was participation from tribes and NGOs throughout the 3 days, and I think there was good engagement on those concerns, those questions of tribal engagement during the process, and some follow-up for that as well.
I hope this gives us some information about how we might position the information that gets presented later. I know that there's a lot of research going on, but seeing it occur with one set of the voluntary agreements, I think is helpful.
Yeah, I think I heard, it was a little hard to hear you, but I agree. I think that it was very helpful to see the information presented and where the questions are, and understand how the board and the public look at that. So I think it was very useful to us. We do not yet know timing on when we might be moving forward or presenting on the San Joaquin side. So.
Okay, any more questions from the board? Okay, are there any members of the public present who would like to comment on this topic? Seeing none, are there any public members at the remote location? Seeing none, thank you, Ms. Castema, for your presentation tonight. Next slide, please. Okay, our next item is public comment on items not on tonight's agenda. Are there any members of the public present who would like to make public comment on an item not on tonight's agenda? Seeing none, are there any public members at the remote location who would like to make a comment? Seeing none, next slide, please. Okay, action calendar. Our next item is the action calendar. We have two action items, the first of which is item 7A, which is the 24-25 work plan, results to be achieved in operating budget. Ms. Sandkulla, will you present this first item?
Absolutely. Good evening, board members. Tonight is one of our bigger meetings of the year, and it really speaks to, it is one of the delegated roles that this board has to take under your enabling legislation, which is to adopt a budget. So I'm excited to present this to you tonight. We start, as always, with the proposed work plan. We've been talking about this for several months. The work plan in front of you addresses the critical issues between now and 2060 to achieve BAWSCA's goal. I've listed them here for you. Hopefully none of these are a surprise at this point. Let me call out a few important ones. Continue BAWSCA's role in managing the water supply agreement with San Francisco to protect the member agency's interests, both financial and water supply. You alone are the only entity charged with doing that by contract and by law. Administering our bonds, engaging with San Francisco on its capital plan, its WISC, the alternative water supply plan. We're going to initiate the development of BAWSCA's Strategy 2050, which I'm incredibly excited about. Updated demand projections, which you acted on last month, and facilitating the adoption of Tier 2. All these are very exciting. It's a very robust work plan for next year. The work plan also reflects some changes from the one that we talked about last March. And I will call out these because I think they're important. First one is, you'll recall last March you authorized entering into a contract with the consultant to do the demand projections, but that contract was greater than what we had anticipated at the time through our proposal process. So the budget has been adjusted to reflect the recommended consultant contract, which means it was increased by $150,000 for next fiscal year and $5,000 in the subsequent fiscal year. Work plan item 4H, which is focused on a possible proposed amendment regarding minimum purchases. We've increased the budget on that, given the activity that is going on with that. And I'm pleased to say that there has been activity even just as of just yesterday on this item, which is very important. Work plan item 9A, administer the water supply agreement to protect the financial interests of the members. We also increased the budget $20,000 on that line item to reflect the PUC's engagement on a critical issue related to the regional source meter and the source meter testing program. This is something that we've been trying to engage with them on for several years. We finally have gotten their interest, so I wanted to make sure we had the budget for that for next year. We have eliminated one subscription conservation program that's no longer needed because we're changing how we do our demand projections with our new consultant, so we don't need to offer that program. And then also work plan item 11 is on hold. That is our internship program for this current summer, given the inability to secure a qualified, really an interested candidate. And as I wanted to let you know that we are committed and we've worked with Eastside to engage sooner, and I think we're going to participate in like an internship fair that happens sooner so we can get the word out. I think we're kind of an anomaly, and in Silicon Valley, students aren't quite sure what to make of us. So we need to get the word out about what a great position it is, because we've never actually had an intern that hasn't talked about how wonderful the internship was for them. So we just need to get the word out. So the proposed operating budget to achieve that work plan is 12.7% higher than this year's current budget, $631,000. It fully funds, there's a couple key things about it. It fully funds the agency's OPEB expenses. That's a decision that was made, position 11 years, and I think it was 2 years before I got in this position, a policy decision by this board to fully fund our OPEB expenses. It does include a budget allowance for up to 5% adjustment to the salary ranges for both COLA and merit-based increases. This is how BAWSCA budgets for salary increases. We don't have a union at BAWSCA. We don't have civil service rules that we comply with. Rather, what we do is we, through the budget process, put together a funding, like a budget pool, which is this 5%, that then is available to the CEO to provide salary increases within the approved salary ranges from the board. The proposed operating budget, if you look at it holistically in the service area, and there was a lot of conversation in the BPC about this, the estimated cost is $3 per person in the service area. So if you take that total operating cost and just divide by the population served, it comes out to $3 a person. If you assume 3 persons per household, it comes out to about $9 per household. Or a different way to look at it is if you take that operating budget cost and divide it by the total number of customer accounts that the BAWSCA agency serves, it comes out to $12.40. Again, these are all just estimates, but that's the way those were calculated. I think importantly, the agency's budget continues to focus on a reliable supply, right? And we've got fair price is a bigger picture this year than it has been. And we're definitely, those investments in the metering work, that's a fair price work. Minimum purchase, that's a fair price work. Those things are showing up in where the budget is applied to our goals. So as we consider how to fund that operating budget, BAWSCA's primary source of funding has been its assessments on its member agencies. I think it's really important, and we've had a lot of discussion internally actually this week on this. BAWSCA's enabling legislation that was passed in 2002, Assembly Bill 2058, sets up not only your role to adopt a budget, but also sets up the assessment process. And it clarifies that the assessments on the member agencies would be based upon 2000, 2001 purchases, because those were the purchases available at the time. That is in your authorizing legislation. And that's the assessment process that the agency has relied upon. In considering how to fund the operating budget, BAWSCA has historically used 4 principles: budgeting sufficient resources to achieve the work plan, spending only what's needed to achieve the results, apply incremental and prudent increases in assessments, and maintain a prudent general reserve. And all 4 of those, right, are kind of weighed against each other, but they're all critically important when we think about how do we fund the operating budget. I am currently estimating this year that we're going to spend roughly 90 to 95% of the approved budget. And as a reminder, this year you funded the operating budget with no increase in assessments. As of the beginning of May, general reserve balance was a little over 1.5 million, which was 31% of the adopted operating budget. You did just adopt the legal counsel contract increase, so that number changes slightly, but not significantly. So in your packet, you have this table in which I analyzed 5 alternative funding options. You've got the current adopted funding plan for fiscal year 2023-24, just for reference purposes, and then you've got 5 options. In the BPC, I recommended either option 2 or option 3. There was robust conversation in the BPC about which option to go with. The BPC, as you heard BPC Chair Hardy mention, did, after all their conversation, settle on option 2, which is a 9% assessment increase. That would leave you with an end of general year reserve that's 21% of the budget. So again, just above your target. Your target is to have a general reserve of 20 to 35% of your operating budget. So with that, the recommended action before you is that the board approve the proposed fiscal year work plan and results to be achieved, the operating budget of $5.614518, and the proposed funding plan option 2 with a 9% assessment increase and a transfer of $340,120 from the general reserve. That concludes my remarks.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Sandkulla. Are there questions from the board on the proposed work plan and budget? Okay, Director Dorr.
Thank you, Chair. A question, so a 9% assessment increase, and it's a 12.7% increase from the last year's budget. I'm curious what the sense is our budget might be for the following year, and then what kind of assessment that might require. Because I know that last year we didn't have an assessment, this year 9%, so that is quite an increase. What might projections look like beyond that?
So, this year's, the budget that you're considering right now for next fiscal year it has a very large project in it, the demand projections project, which is really what's driving this increase in cost. That will not have a similar effect in the subsequent fiscal year, not to say that so I would not expect the same amount of increase going forward. 9% is a fairly significant increase for us, but it is the combination of tier 2 demand projections and minimum, there's a lot of work going on right at the moment. So I would not expect that to happen in your subsequent fiscal year.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Matichak.
Thank you. Last time, I had laryngitis. This time, I just have allergies. There's no voice. I did have a question on packet page 55, and that is talking about if new projects become a priority, such as the water supply agreement amendment to address the minimum purchase obligations, that might impact other projects. And yet, on the work plan, I do see that item. And so I was wondering if the impact has already been factored in to the proposed work plan, and that something that's currently on the work plan would not slip as a result, since there is activity around that topic.
Yeah, so the biggest piece of it, so the minimum purchase obligation, and I haven't talked a lot about it in front of the board, but there are 4 agencies that have an obligation to buy a certain amount of water from San Francisco as a minimum, a take or pay, because they have access to an outside imported water supply. There's been a lot of discussion, and it was over a year ago, San Francisco put a proposal on the table to the minimum purchase agencies. This is part of your contract that you all share. It's in the water supply agreement, so you all have an interest in it. And we've been engaging in, I would say, sporadic conversations with San Francisco on this. And that has started in literally just the last 2 weeks to ramp up, as you've mentioned. The impact will happen if it either stalls. So next year, as I look to next year, if we keep making good progress, all will be good. But you never know how these negotiations go on. And if we suddenly either get stalled or uber complicated, both are almost just as bad, then that's going to have an impact. And that'll just be something I would have to come back to you to say, hey, it's not progressing, and either it requires more time or something else, right? But the action we've been having is good, which is a great site.
Thank you. Do you want comments as well, or just questions?
Say again?
Do you want comments or just questions?
Either.
Okay. So along these lines, I don't know if everyone knows the magnitude of the penalty that some jurisdictions pay because of this minimum purchase agreement. And in Mountain View, it's many millions of dollars that we are paying because our residents and our businesses have done such a fabulous job of conserving water. So I think the estimate for this year is $4 million penalty. And that does get built into the rates that our residents and businesses pay. And it's so significant. This one is really, really important to Mountain View, and I'm assuming the other jurisdictions. I think because it is so important, it'd be great to have this done and have it go at the same time the Tier 2 plan goes to everyone's council to have both of those so that we're just kind of having one BAWSCA item when we go to all of our respective jurisdictions. That would be my desire, to have it work that way. So I'm glad to see it's on here and that it's progressing. I had another question. On packet page 63, there's a couple of items on the work plan. Let me get to it. And it's under reliable supply, item 2 and 3. And I read those both a few times, and I thought, I see a couple of words that are different, but they seem very similar to me. And so I thought, well, I'll ask, what is the difference between those two?
So, so number 2 speaks to legislation, right? So it's, in the work plan, we do not have resources to support new legislation, whereas number 3 is litigation.
Litigation.
Yeah.
Boy, I just read that as the same
Yeah.
word. I apologize.
Nope, that's okay. I can understand that. I appreciate actually that you read it, because those are very important points. When you speak, you know, this table is so critical, because it is a tool, and I'll share this with all of you as you think about your new CEO. It is a tool that your CEO uses to manage your budget and your staff resources, because this is it. There's only 9 of us, right? So there has to be things that I can say are not in our work plan. And then if you want to do them, you all have to talk about it and change something. So.
Thank you. And then I was just very happy to see under agency efficiency, item 12, to see if we can get to hybrid meetings. So thank you for having that in the work plan. Thank you.
Okay. Director Andrews.
Thank you. I'm also happy to see the hybrid meetings come into fruition. I know there was a lot of hard work to get to that. I had a question about the options. What are the differences between the two? So I don't want to increase the percentage, but just was curious of what are the highlights of what we're losing by not going with option 3, 4, and 5?
Yeah, so for option 3, you increase your assessments. So as you increase your assessments every time, you take less money out of your general reserve, so that you just save more money in your general. That's literally the math balance.
Right.
So, and option 5 was essentially if you were to fund the whole thing by increasing assessments.
Okay.
So that's like your maximum scenario, right? Which I would never recommend when you had a general reserve of this length. And then I was just trying to look at, okay, what are some ranges in between? Knowing that option 1, which was 7%, puts you at your bottom level of your target for budgeting purposes.
So are there any specific items that you would have liked to seen on your wish list that
No,
would have been part of
so this
the higher
is-
percentage of the reserve?
No, I would be fine. As I mentioned to the BPC, I was fine with either option 2 or option 3.
Okay.
I would not recommend option 1. I think that's, that's target, taking too much out of your general reserve. It just putting yourself at that low level. And I certainly wouldn't recommend funding it totally by assessments. So I was comfortable with either 9% or 10%, option 2 or option 3.
Okay. And are there any major projects you see on the horizon that would have been part of option 3, 4, or 5 that we should be thinking about if we approve 9, but we know this is coming up?
No, not at this point, from what I can see. You are looking at an item that you're not acting on tonight, but you're acting on in July, is the long-term reliable water supply strategy, and you're looking at a separate funding mechanism for that.
Okay.
That would be a big deal if that, but the rest of what's in our budget, the work plan is as I would recommend it. We haven't had to go through and say, okay, we can't fund this work plan. So I feel very confident in that, and it's setting us up, I think, for a good spot for subsequent years, because you are increasing your assessments, right? You're increasing it, so you're gonna have some flexibility as the demand study goes away, essentially to support urban water management plans. That's gonna be the next round of support you have to do, and that's gonna be in that like $200,000 range. You'll be able to accommodate that within this, so
Okay.
I'm feeling pretty good.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Director Stone.
Yeah, thank you. I think most of my just kind of concerns around the increase in water rates and these assessments. Been hearing from a lot of residents just kind of frustrations of ongoing increases in various rates, whether it be water or electric or all these other areas that we don't have any control over. I appreciated Director Dora's kind of questioning on that, on the assessment. A couple of just kind of questions, I guess, regarding that work plan and our involvement with, or at least the link between water rates and capital projects and some kind of large capital projects that we're envisioning and what SFPUC is doing. Do we work with SFPUC in the development of the water enterprise 10-year plan? I mean, how engaged are we in that? Because I'd imagine a lot of the capital projects that's being done there is going to impact our water rates our rates significantly.
The rates you pay through San Francisco
Yes.
significantly. Yes. So, in 2018, BAWSCA was successful in getting San Francisco to agree to a contract amendment that requires them to engage with BAWSCA during their CIP development a few times before it's finalized, and then also for us to receive it ahead of time to provide them our input and comment. That was the first time that had ever happened. Prior to that, it was kind of like we got it when the public got it a week, 5 days before the commission meeting. And so that was a very significant step forward. On our team, Tom and his engineers actually meet with San Francisco regularly on the capital plan itself, on its implementation. As part of that, they generally get a sense for what's going to be in the next CIP, right? Because it's usually, what are you having issues with? How does that feed into the CIP? And it's through that process we often give early feedback. A great example of that is the Sandkulla Valley Water Treatment Plant improvements that were actually just approved by the commission this last Tuesday. That was a capital project that was brought up probably 5 years ago at Sandkulla Valley Water Treatment Plant to deal with algae issues that show up in the summertime, where we have issues in that reservoir, which is over in the Sandkulla, and the ability of the Sandkulla Valley Water Treatment Plant to treat that water. And in the course of our work with San Francisco, they approached us and we agreed that that was an important project to put in despite its significant price tag, because the agencies were having difficulty with the water quality that they were delivering to their customers. So we engage at kind of different levels, right? If we wait until the capital plan is packaged to go to the commission, it's too late, right? It's already baked. That's kind of the finesse part of it. That's kind of the, well, are there some trade-offs going on at that point? What we try to do is engage early on so that they're thinking about the projects that we think are important, and we can get them to the point where we appreciate and acknowledge how those projects look. Another example, for example, is the Pillar Cetus Reservoir that's up here behind us on the peninsula that serves, Coastside gets the majority of its water out of Pillar Cetus. And it has a massive capital need. And we are engaged now with San Francisco about trying to figure out what's the alternative project they're going to do to make sure that Coastside can continue to get water out of that project, and also that the rest of the system can benefit from the water supply. So that's how we engage.
That's good to hear that there's several touch points and it's not at the end, as you said, fully baked. And then one additional question: do we already kind of look at projected water rate increases and how they are tied to capital projects when we are looking at our capital project plan to really better understand what that ultimate impact is going to be on those water rates?
So yes and no. So for example, when we were going through the WISIP process, right, which is a major reason the water rates are the way they are right now, right? If you go back to 2001, there was an active engagement and dialogue with every wholesale customer, every council, because I was part of that, and the state legislature when we went and had the legislation passed to force San Francisco to fix the system, that we all knew the rates were going to triple. I mean, that is why they are the way they are today, is because of those WISIP costs. And everyone agreed that that was the cost to ensure a reliable water supply. Now, as we look forward to your next challenge, which is the water supply reliability, not the facility reliability, but water supply reliability. The question will be, do we want to invest in Los Vaqueros? Do we want to invest in potable reuse? How comfortable are we in those investments? Right now, those significant dollar decisions are not coming forward. We're supporting the planning work, and we've continued to have that discussion with the water management reps regularly to continue to support the planning work, so that when it gets to the point that you make a decision, do we want to go forward with that project? We have the information available, and we can engage more fully in that conversation. But we're not there yet, right? We're not making the decision to be a partner in Los Vaqueros Reservoir and be part of building that capital project. Right now, we're saying we're gonna put in our share of the next level of planning costs, right? And if you don't put your planning cost money in, you don't even have an opportunity to participate in the project. So that's where we're at right now. And my expectation is that, and this board should expect, as we get to those significant dollar decisions, to have that information brought before you and have an opportunity to provide some input onto it. And also, the agencies individually through the water management reps will too, right? Because they are the contract holders. I mean, this is this interesting relationship, right? It is the individual member agencies that are the contract holders that pay this to San Francisco. You, as a board, all of you together represent the entire region, not the individual agencies. So you have a different way you have to kind of think about it.
Yeah, and I think that'd be really helpful being able to see those projected rate, at least the projections of what that's going to look like based on these capital projects, because otherwise it kind of feels like we'd be making some major purchasing decisions without really fully understanding the full consequences on the price tag for not only
Sure.
us as an agency, but our customers at the end of the day. So, all right, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Victor Mellinger.
Thank you very much, Chair Chambers. So I have a few questions here, and the first has to do with staffing levels. One of the things I saw in the report is that every staffer is allocated over 100%, with the CEO allocated 150%. Good luck. The first question I'd like to ask is, just how impacted are the staff? Are we talking 105%? Are we talking 125%? I noticed that there's a $68,000 item for consulting services. That would be what, roughly a half-time person?
Yes, so you're right. And I will say that analysis is something where, it's a back-of-the-envelope analysis. We don't keep track of our time like consultants.
Right.
So I generally look at it year over year and kind of say, how is everybody feeling and how are people allocating time? And that's where, when we did it, if you recall, when I came to you in March, I said, hey, we're way over allocated. And we had to adjust some things. And that's where we thought, okay, let's put an allocation for some funding if we need some outside resources to help us bridge the gap on staff. And that is an unidentified resource, right, at this moment. It's literally just a funding spot. Because it's difficult, as everybody knows, to try to find the right person for the task that doesn't require more time to manage the person than it does to actually get the job done, right? This staff is very busy. They're very busy. So there's not a lot of flex to do that, and they respond and will do what's needed to get it done. But that's where I also think it's important. When I saw the first round of the budget, I was like, that's too high. So I think this is something, that you will, as I think about leaving, one of the things I've committed to the chair is to write down some of my thoughts, about recommendations or things that the board might want to consider. And I think I kind of teed this up a little bit for us in March. You may need some more staff. You may need another staff person. But I wasn't prepared, honestly, this spring to try to sell that. So I think that's something that you have to kind of anticipate may show up.
That was going to be my next question. And regrettably, I was ill in March, and so I wasn't able to make that meeting.
Yeah.
But I was going to ask, at what point do we want to consider a 10th staff member?
Yeah.
And, that obviously comes with some significant long-term budgetary impacts. My next question is this heavily impacted workload. Obviously, there are a number of long-term projects that have kind of hit at the same time, which is a matter of luck, let's say. But do we expect that staff workload to start coming down to a bit more manageable levels, or is this the normal?
Well, that's partially why I didn't make the recommendation in March, and I wasn't coming saying, okay, the sky is falling, we've got a permanent problem. I think that's something to consider, you know, and Tom Francis and I have talked about it a lot. I've talked about it a lot with Christina Tang as well, you know, to say, hey, this is something we all need to think about and you guys need to be aware of. And I think as we get through January, February, you get the new CEO on board, I think that's one thing you're gonna have to reconsider, so.
Okay. My next question has to do, and this is sort of going off of Director Doerr's question about, you know, long-term projects. Long-term projects are one source of major expenditures, or let's say spiky expenditures. The other is if some risk hits, if some risk comes to fruition. Do we see any sort of major risks that could bite us in the next few years that could require a substantial expenditure?
No.
No? Okay,
Nope.
that's very, that is very good to hear. You mentioned that the two options you were comfortable with were option 2 and option 3. Obviously, option 5 is a bit out there. I'm curious, you know, your thoughts as to why you don't put option 4 in the bucket of, you know, acceptable range.
So, this has to do with how, the dynamics of BAWSCA's budgeting, and when we go, and if we don't spend all our money, it rolls over into our general reserve. And the agency's interest in managing its general reserve, so it's not perceived, because we don't have an operating arm, we don't have these needs for huge reserves, right? So there was a time when our reserve got too high, and the board was very concerned about it, and we ended up giving a rebate to the agencies, and it caused all sorts of chaos, right? So we don't want to do that. And Director Pierce remembers, because she was chair at the time, I think. Yeah, so that's where I think, you know, that's just a little too high. My concern would be that you might be, these extraordinary expenses for planning this year, maybe into next year, is gonna, your overall budget is increasing. Like, I don't know that you need to go that high.
Understood, because of course those rate increases would continue year on year.
Exactly.
Okay. That makes a
Yeah.
lot of sense.
Yeah.
Right, well, I believe that does it for my questions. This has been very helpful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Director Dorr. Okay, Director Andrews, go.
Director Dorr, then Pierce, and Andrews.
Sure, thank you. Hello, hello, testing, there we are. Okay, yes. Thank you for the question about assessments and the context for those assessments, Director Stone. That was helpful and made me have another question here of, is there a visual or something that shows our assessment increases over the last 10 years?
There's not a visual, but there's a table in your memo.
Okay, great, I'll go find that one.
It's
Thank
the
you.
big one at the end,
Okay, thank you.
at the end of the budget memo, yeah.
Great, and one thing I'd like to clarify, Director Matichak mentioned the activity of hybrid meetings, and that was mentioned in the table that says activities that will not be included in the proposed work plan for FY 24-25 on page 63.
Thank you for calling that out. I got distracted by the comment, and I meant to mark that. That is correct. It is in the table, and I had it called out because it needs to be a deliberate decision of the board to do it, and so I just wanted to make sure it was very clear. Thank you for clarifying that.
And I'm glad it's written here because I share the desire to see a hybrid meeting move forward, and if the board would be interested in that, I would love to entertain a bigger conversation on making that a priority to add back in.
Okay,
Oh, and sorry, there's one last thing. I know in our proposed budget here, it does mention a merit increase, which I think would apply if we have a CEO who's staying on for another year or years. And so given that, I'm wondering, given the retirement announcement, I'm curious if there's a plan to update the budget accordingly.
So I had a conversation with the chair about this. You don't know what's gonna happen, right, next fiscal year with the new CO and however you hire it. Your general reserve that you have will be able to accommodate whatever adjustment is needed, and however you might need to adjust your budget after you know what the number is. But right now, you don't know what that is.
I'm referring to the merit increase that would happen at the end of this year.
So the merit increase, it's just an allowance. It's just an allowance, that's all it is. Yeah.
Okay, Inspector Pierce?
Yes, thank you. Is that better? Okay. One of the things I'd like to say is I've really appreciated over the years how you plan your budget. You start with what you wish to accomplish, and then you plan the expenses so that, unlike some of our cities, by the time the budget comes to us with the options about the costs, it isn't a question of getting rid of things or not doing things, and I've really appreciated that over the years. I think it certainly makes things a lot easier. One of the things that I also thought was very helpful for me is thinking about what BAWSCA gives to the agencies, provides to the agencies for this essentially more or less $12 per person a year, right? That's yearly?
It's actually $3 a person per year.
All right. so
$12 per count.
Okay, so for $3, we watchdog San Francisco. We do all of this planning. We engage with the agencies to make sure that they get what they need with all of the reports that they have to do, and I think it's an incredible bargain. So I think sometimes when I've fretted about going to my council and saying we're gonna BAWSCA's rates are gonna go up 15%, one of my council members said, our water rates are the things that impact people, not BAWSCA's. And so as I was thinking about that, I thought I wanted to share that because our water rates, when they go up, really do make a difference. And one of the things that we want to ensure that BAWSCA does is that they do watchdog San Francisco, because those big capital projects will impact what they charge our agencies, which then get passed on. And so I think that that's really a critical role that BAWSCA plays. And so I just wanted to say, I hope that whoever follows you, that we can train them in this way of approaching things, because the way to control costs is really through our work with San Francisco. And that's why we have high legal costs, because we have to have a lawyer in the room at all the time. So anyway, so I just thought I would give that perspective and say part of the reason I felt really comfortable with the 9% is having seen our reserves go up and down. You know, you want to have enough, but you don't want to have too much. And we've been able to really control, through Nicole's work and the staff's work, really control those costs. And she's been very proactive about saying, let's postpone the beginning of this one piece of work so that it flows and other work decreases. And so I just wanted to share that perspective with the board.
Okay, thank you. Director Andrews.
Yes, I just wanted to acknowledge that I did see the near-term, mid-term, short, and long-term list here, so that kind of informs my previous question, so thank you for providing that. One question I had was actually about staffing as well. What would be the things that a person would focus on if people were at 100% allocation and you were able to get that position? What would be the items that you all need help with? Maybe I should ask your staff, because they finally tell me better, but.
So we actually have had quite a bit of discussion on this, and there's two areas, and I think there's a way for them to work together. One is that Christina Tang and her amazing work that she does, she has no backup, right? Which is not, I don't think, given not just the auditing function she serves for the $300 million that all of your water customers send to San Francisco every year, but also oversees the bonds that you have issued that save your water customers $2.5 million a year? Yeah, $2.5 million a year, right? It used to be that was almost our budget, so, you know. So she oversees all of that, and she has no backup, which means there's also no redundancy. So one thought was, is there a way to create kind of a management analyst, financial person that also can assist the water resources team in some of the contract management and the money part of their work? That, because then that helps bridge the gap, which is actually really good in my mind, is to have some cross-training through the agency. So, but that would be a totally new kind of position, which is why I was just not prepared to figure out how to do that this spring. It just wasn't possible.
I think that makes a lot of sense. So if we were to look at that in the future, it will have folks focus on engineering, capital projects, watching San Francisco, doing those things that are their main focus versus doing that administrative item. Those administrative items, they really eat up your time.
They eat up a lot of time, and it's not just it's like a specific kind of it's a project administration piece that goes both places. So that's how I've been thinking about it. And again, that would be one of the things I'll put in my list for the chair.
Okay, and then last question about the intern. I understand that we didn't get a lot of participation. Have you talked to SFPUC about their internship program and maybe some partnership there?
So if you'll recall, the board was very interested in doing something within the service area, and we have partnered with Eastside Prep to do that. I think honestly, our first 2 years, we had really great interns, and it was easy for us, and I think we just actually stumbled across what is actually a bigger need for us, which is to get out in front of the students and engage with them. And I think that's a benefit even in of itself, right? Because part of the internship is to turn students onto water, right? And the more people, the more students we can turn on to water, the better. So I think we have that. I mean, we have a great partner with Eastside, so I want to give it that opportunity and see if we can turn it around with them.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you ever want to open it up to more, I know a lot of our cities have youth commissions, so that's
that's a
another
great idea.
opportunity to advertise through them.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Okay, any more questions from the board? Okay, Ms. Andrews' thing is going to go down, or you want it? Okay. Thank you, Ms. Sandkulla. Are there questions from the board? Are there any members of the public in this room who wish to comment? Are there any public at the remote site that would like to comment? Hearing none. Okay, any further discussions from the board? Do I have a motion and a second for this agenda item, which is the approval of the budget? Director Hamilton.
I'll make a motion that we approve the proposed fiscal year 24-25 work plan, the proposed operating budget of $5,614,518, and the proposed funding plan option 2, which is the 9% increase.
Okay, thank you. Second is Director Pierce. Okay, after no further questions from the board, let's proceed to the vote. Ms. Sandkulla, can you please call the roll, assuming you have your piece of paper up there?
I do, I brought it up with me.
I noticed it's not here anymore.
Andrews?
Aye.
Bro?
Yes, Brisbane and GVMID.
Thank you. Chambers?
Aye.
Cohen? Dorr?
Aye.
Okay. Duncan?
Aye.
Hamilton?
Aye.
Hardy?
Yes.
Hindi? Jordan? Lopez?
Aye.
Thank you. Manalo?
Aye.
Thank you. Matichak?
Yes.
Mellinger?
Yes.
Mickelson?
Yes.
Montano?
Yes.
Piccolotti?
Aye.
Pierce? Ragsdale?
Yes.
Schneider?
Aye.
Stevenson? Stone?
Yes.
Vella?
Yes.
Weed?
Aye.
And Zichterman?
Yes.
And the motion passes.
Thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, our second item, item 7B, is the approval of the professional services contracts for fiscal year 2024-25. Ms. Sandkulla, will you present this item?
Again, thank you very much, Chair Chambers. So you might wonder how we actually do all this work. We do this work with an incredible team of consultants. We've got 11 professional services contracts for technical and administrative services, financial services that are needed to help us implement our work plan. We need this contracts in place starting July 1. There is a memo in your packet for each one of these contracts. I'm not planning to go through them unless you have questions. There are also 7, and each of these 11 professional services contracts are funded through the operating budget. There are also 7 consultant contracts for subscription conservation programs that are needed to implement our conservation program and our work plan for next fiscal year. These 7 consultant contracts are funded by the participating member agencies. So BAWSCA enters into a contract and we fully recover the costs from the member agencies for this work. Again, there is a memo in your packet for each one of these, and we can answer any questions that you may have. The recommendation is that the board approve the 18 contracts for legal, engineering, financial, strategic, not strategic, strike that, sorry, and water conservation services needing to be in place by July 1, 2024.
Yes.
Yes, thank you, sorry. So the Hazen Sawyer contract, it models the entire 3 counties and the supplies that our agencies bring into the picture. So it's not a groundwater model, but it will take into account, say, if Millbrae develops groundwater, we can add that as a supply that serves Millbrae.
Okay, great. I have a couple more here. I can come back, Chair, if I'm holding up.
Not sure that you are. Director Hamilton?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
No, go ahead. Let me find
He-
my next- no.
That was from his second.
I'm trying to find, well, then, the other one that I had is, and it might be the modeling, it might be the usage one, or it might be in one of the water conservation training, the supplementals. Do you want to do the supplementals later?
Nope, they're all one.
Okay, the question I had on one of the supplementals was, will the ones that are looking at drought tolerant planning and reduction in outdoor water use, will it also include plants that are fire resistant? Because I think we're beyond just drought tolerant and pollinators. I think we need those plants that can help reduce risk for wildfire. So as all of our cities are also working on fire suppression, that's included. So my question was just, can we ask that consultant to also look at fire resistant plants?
So I like the suggestion, and I'm going to look over to Kyle here. In that it's something for us to consider as we look at our plant lists for the Lawn Be Gone program, to highlight fire-resistant plants and kind of try to elevate that as a category.
And then the second part of that, as we're looking at finally having a tree ordinance and we're replacing oak trees, we are being told by our arborists that the native oaks may not be the future oaks. So it's also time to be looking, especially in our trees, for trees that are adapting to the new climate. And we all are in slightly different microclimates. So if that same consultant could also look at what those, so instead of one type of oak tree, it's a different oak tree. So it's still within the same genus, but it's a different species. Did I get that right?
Okay, I think
Anyway,
so.
along that line.
Thank you very much.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Are there any other questions from the board? Any questions from the public in this room? Any questions from the public at the remote site? Seeing none. Any further discussions from the board? Do I have a motion and second for this agenda item? Director Snyder.
I'm not ready to read the motion properly. I'm happy to make the motion. I don't have the words in front of me.
You're up there.
That the board approve the 18 contracts, subject to legal counsel review for legal, engineering, financial, strategic, and water conservation
Thank you. That's the first, Director Pierce.
There, now I'm on, okay. Second.
Okay. Any further discussions from the board? If there's no further board questions, we'll proceed to the vote. Ms. Sandkulla, can you please call the roll?
Yes. Andrews.
Aye.
Bro.
Yes, for Brisbane and GVMID.
Thank you. Chambers.
Yes?
Cohen. Dorr.
Yes.
Duncan.
Yes.
Hamilton.
Yes.
Hardy.
Yes.
Hindi. Jordan. Lopez.
Yes.
Manalo.
Yes.
Thank you. Matichek.
Yes.
Mellinger.
Yes.
Mickelson.
Yes.
Montano.
Yes.
Picolotti.
Aye.
Pierce. Ragsdale.
Yes.
Schneider.
Aye.
Stevenson. Stone.
Yes.
Vella.
Yes.
Weed.
Aye.
Zichterman.
Yes.
And the motion passes.
Thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, next agenda item is reports and discussion. We have two items, the first of which is item 8A, is a report on the negotiations of new Tier 2 plan. Ms. McPherson, will you please present this first item?
Yes. Good evening, Board of Directors. Can you hear me? Okay. I'm pleased to present that the lead negotiators continue to make steady progress towards their end of June goal to come to consensus on an updated Tier 2 plan. Once they have finalized that updated plan, they will bring it to each of their governing bodies for adoption, which requires unanimous adoption. From BAWSCA's experience, that takes about 6 months. You may also recall that the existing Tier 2 plan expires at the end of this calendar year. So while the lead negotiators are making progress and staff does believe that they will meet the end of June deadline, we're always contingency planning. We don't want to be caught flat-footed at the end of the year should the BAWSCA board need to act. So BAWSCA has been providing general updates, and beginning in June, depending on where the negotiations are, those will become more thorough so that at the October BPC and the November board meeting, the BAWSCA board, if they need to act, will have information so that they can do that. And that concludes my remarks to the board.
Okay, thank you, Ms. McPherson. Are there questions from the board on the status of the current negotiations? Seeing none, are there any members of the public present in this room that wish to comment? Seeing none, are there any public commenters in the remote location? Seeing none, next slide, please. And thank you, Ms. McPherson, again. Our second item, item 8B, is a discussion of BAWSCA's long-term reliable water supply strategy, or Strategy 2050. Mr. Shorey, will you present this item?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. Good evening, BAWSCA board. I'm going to be providing further information on the status of the scope development for Strategy 2050, as seen in the timeline on this slide for May 2024. We're on track with completing the scope development for this fiscal year with really helpful input from both the board and the WMR agencies. In the board Strategy 2050 memo, we provided the draft scope of work that we have developed, which we'll go through tonight. And we're hoping to receive any feedback you have at that time. And we'll also be presenting the potential funding strategy for providing the funding for Strategy 2050. We anticipate that the scope of work will be finalized in the coming weeks, and we will also present recommended action for moving forward with the consultant for Strategy 2050 development at the July board meeting. Now, just to give a brief background on how we developed the scope of work for Strategy 2050, we first began by establishing its purpose, right? And with discussions with both the board and the WMR. We, had edits with it. We moved some of the wording around, and we came out to have this purpose to identify the water supply and demand management needs and opportunities for the BAWSCA region and establish a framework to collectively support water reliability and resilience. From there, we received further information from the WMRs from a survey that we provided to them to really identify what the needs are for each of the agencies. We used that information to develop 6 Strategy 2050 objectives to achieve that purpose that was shown on this slide. Now, these 6 objectives are in addition to BAWSCA's work to oversee the WSA, and the objectives align with BAWSCA's goal of a reliable water supply, a supply of high-quality water at a fair price. So after establishing these objectives, the purpose and objectives of Strategy 2050 was then used to support the identification of 7 key tasks for the scope of work, which we will be going through tonight and was provided in the board memo. So that first key task of 2050 is to evaluate water supply and demand management reliability. We had these other details or subtasks that we kind of broke them down into. That first subtask is to conduct a risk assessment. So we're using our existing riverware model. So we're using models that we already have established, and we're going to review potential risks impacting water supply reliability. So this could include climate change, other regulations, and others, and how it could really impact our water supply. The second subtask is to assist our agencies in their development of the 2025 Urban Water Management Plan by analyzing individual BAWSCA agencies' water demand, and then looking at the water use efficiency potentials, their reliability risks, and then looking at potential water supply projects to mitigate those shortages and be used in the urban water management plans. The last 2 subtasks are to assess existing risks. So we're looking at wildfires, earthquakes, as well as sea level rise. And we can look at other risks as well, and then review emergency frameworks, response plans within the BAWSCA region, as well as outside other agencies outside of the BAWSCA region, and see what those differences are and look at some of these best practices in emergency planning. Now, that second key task is to assess regulatory setting and collaboration opportunities and really understand what the current as well as the future regulations might be that impacts water management and project implementation. And some of those can include water use efficiency regulations and requirements, water quality, as well as potable reuse. And then we would prepare a summary of some of these key regulations and then their potential risks and opportunities for the BAWSCA region. So this can include, what impacts it has on water supply availability, what the costs might be, as well as the implications it might have on staffing at each of the agencies. And then that second one is to assess framework for future regulatory collaboration, really developing these recommended actions for advancing the regulatory collaboration between the agencies, and looking at what it might be for other regional frameworks, like looking at the Regional Water Authority. That third key task that we developed is to evaluate existing project concepts, identify new regional project opportunities, and then some of the details with that is to establish and refine that project inventory. We did a great job through the One Water Roundtable series last fiscal year, and we had this compiled list identified from the BAWSCA agencies of projects, but we want to really put that into a single shareable database. And then we would refine some of those project details, putting in further details about what their potential benefits might be, the capital costs, O&M costs, as well as some of the anticipated challenges and complexities with those projects moving forward. And then we would develop further projects that might come in the horizon. So looking at, up to 12 additional project concepts that we can look at within the BAWSCA region. And then develop metrics for comparing those water supply projects and portfolios. So some of these metrics developed will really evaluate project opportunities, and those could include, again, cost, dry year reliability benefits, and other factors related to regulatory complexity, speed of implementation, and then the community environmental benefits. 3 is really long. We're also looking at updating the regional groundwater model with that, and that can look at what our model currently is. We have that groundwater model that was updated in 2018, but we want to use more updated information with that, as well as kind of looking and identifying some of these water quality concerns, such as PFAS and nitrification in the BAWSCA region. And then finally, for some of the other details with Key Task 3, is a subscription program for the agencies for individual planning tasks that would go beyond the scoping at the regional level. So the 4th one is to provide support to member agencies in their effort to obtain external funding. We have almost completed the grant tracking tool. We're going to be sharing it with the agencies in the next month or so before the fiscal year is over. But we're also interested in expanding that. So we want to look at incorporating new funding opportunities and align that with that project inventory that I spoke of in Task 3. So looking at what that would be and how we can find some funding for those projects. And then establish a comprehensive regional funding strategy and advocacy approach for that. And then for the 3rd subtask is providing funding support for a subscription program for each of the agencies, for funding application support, for individual and regional projects, and that could include project development to increase funding readiness, preparation of grant applications and associated materials, and then grant administrative services. And then during the Strategy 2050 development, we are still going to look at funding opportunities to fund Strategy 2050 itself, and that is within the budget as well for this project. And then we have 3 other key tasks that I'm going to go through. The 5th is to document drinking water affordability challenges and opportunities. So really reviewing the state and regional findings and efforts related to affordability, including water efforts from individual BAWSCA agencies and others to identify challenges and opportunities, and then develop recommendations on what those potential programs might be that could be considered either on a local or regional level. The 6th is to develop the method to track and report on the status of Strategy 2050 implementation. We want to develop a dashboard where the agencies can put their information for their projects, and we have keep track of all of that. And then develop a custom decision support tool to support the agency's planning and decision making. And so that support tool will really provide further capability and adjust assumptions and prioritize like alternatives for each of these projects. So for example, in the decision support tool, we can prioritize projects that provide more dry year reliability, or ones that can be developed in a shorter period of time. And you can prioritize those type of projects in this decision support tool. And then we would develop these metrics for tracking the progress of Strategy 2050 objectives, which would tie into that decision support tool. And then finally, this would develop an initial Strategy 2050 progress report to see where we are with that development of outline the next steps to reach those objectives and purpose of Strategy 2050. And then finally, with the key task of 7 is to report have a report preparation, and that would include both the findings, near and long-term recommendations for it. And then we would provide some communication materials, PowerPoints, as well as maybe videos on all the information and all the things that we have done through Strategy 2050. Now, looking at the funding for it, we have, now that we're almost done with finalizing the scope of work, BAWSCA, during the next board meeting in July, we would recommend the approval of a contract with a selected consultant for the development of 2050, as well as a recommendation for the approval of funding Strategy 2050. And this would be through a water management charge. And this would be through an authorization through Section 3.06A of the WSA. And so some of the benefits of using a water management charge is really some flexibility to collect that revenue and allocate the costs differently from the BAWSCA assessment process. And then it becomes a really discrete, separate project budget that can be tracked and monitored separately from the BAWSCA operating budget. And then agencies are able to include that water management charge in customers' bills. And that's part of the cost of water from San Francisco. Now looking at, we have used that water management charge previously. This was used successfully to fund the 2015 strategy back in 2010. And at that time, that project cost roughly $2.3 million. And we will be proposing a similar funding method for Strategy 2050. So we're estimating, we haven't finalized it yet, but we're estimating about a cost of $2.67 million for the project, and that would be collected over 18 months. So it's about $126,000 per month. And then charges allocated to agencies would be in proportion to their fiscal year 2000-2001 regional water system purchases. And this is actually the same calculation and formula that we use for the BAWSCA assessments, as was set by the BAWSCA enabling legislation of 2058, and the same one that funded Strategy 2015. And then San Francisco would then collect that fund via, it's like a new line item that would say water management charge, and it would be added to each wholesale customer water bill. And that would begin in September of 2024 and would remit that BAWSCA for its use on behalf of the agencies. And at the end of each fiscal year, a report would be developed. We would provide that to San Francisco to really show them how much money was used, as well as what it was used for. So next steps towards finalizing the scope of work. I also want to state that the scope of, as the scope of work is finalized, we also will be providing a detailed schedule that will be provided to identify, the key points of engagement with the board and the WMR throughout the development of Strategy 2050. We want to be having regular scheduled workshops and meetings with the agencies. So there is going to be discussions in the year, that 18 months as well. And we'll continue to coordinate with San Francisco on the administrative matters involving the billing and collecting and remitting that water management charge. And then again, that schedule anticipates board action to authorize a recommended consultant contract, associated scope of work, as well as a funding method for that during the next board meeting in July. And then we would anticipate to start Strategy 2050 in January of 2025. And that's it for my presentation.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Shuri. Are there questions from the board on this Strategy 2050? Director Weed.
Yes, 2 items. First of all, I would encourage you to look at water markets as one of your issues. Members in this room are paying, with San Francisco, are paying 10 times the amount that is on that water is being sold on the exchanges currently in California. So The agricultural interests are paying $250 commonly for it. We're paying $2,500. Big difference. And there's an extraordinary opportunity, and there is certainly capacity in our distribution systems to be able to purchase water and bring it in. Whether it be acquiring property, even the ownership of farmland is being a common practice now, a growing practice by urban water districts. Next, one of the great black swans of the water quality world landed last week. On Wednesday of last week, the MCL for PFAS was published. We have 5 years to come into compliance, 4 parts per trillion, and for PFAS and 10 parts per trillion for Gen X. But more importantly, and of greater concern, is that PFAS have been identified under CERCLA. The LA and CERCLA is Liabilities Act. Joint and several liabilities. Recycled water is a de novo generator of PFAS. What to do with the permeant? We might be able to meet it for the product water. It's in our own case at 12 MGD. That leaves you with 3 million gallons a day of what is now being declared a toxic hazardous waste under CERCLA that you, in all probability, will not be able to put back into the sewer system, and the management and energy costs are extraordinary. Nor can you rely on, I give credit to Hanson Bridgett, a firm, for putting out an opinion piece on the law and the CERCLA, that even if you have assurances from EPA they're not going to enforce it, anyone can go to courts and apply that and have the courts trump the EPA and require that those liability assessments be put into place, and the liabilities can be extraordinary, joint and several, which means even if we're a minor player, if we have the money in our pockets, the wealthier districts could be held for the whole cost. The cost of cleanup, raising it to temperatures of 900 degrees Celsius, will blow any energy budget you have out of the water. There's no solution now for how to handle it. So I see that as one of our concerns, and hopefully we will look to converting recycled water to desalination. While we have brine, at least brine is not regulated by CERCLA. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Director Andrews.
Thank you, Director Weed, for bringing that up. I was wondering, with Strategy 2050, are we going to partner with our wastewater treatment facility agencies, or their joint agreements with different advocacy groups like CASA to look at some of the legislation that's coming down and look at how to protect agencies as we're trying to figure out solutions to addressing PFAS and PFOA?
That could be a potential. You know, we budgeted having workshops where we can bring outside people from wastewater, that we could potentially do that.
Okay, yes, I definitely recommend
Okay.
an item where we work with CASA, California Association of Sanitary Agencies, because they're doing a lot of advocacy there. And then I know that we mentioned grants before. Are we looking towards advocacy for grants through our member agencies, or are we doing it with BAWSCA? Are we looking at having our agencies do letter of support, or are we interested in having someone on staff look at grants, or hiring someone to be focused on obtaining grants for this work?
Yeah, so we're looking at having a consultant, and we would have potentially a database showing all the grants that are available to the agencies. And then it would also be a subscription program to help each of the agencies with applying to those grants.
So that's what the subscription program is. Okay, great, thank you.
Okay, Director Dorr.
Thank you. Thinking about the conversation earlier about the minimum purchase agreements and opportunities to reassess how that is looking, because some folks who are conserving are being required to pay more, a fee for their conservation. I'm curious where and how conversations around that fit in this scope, because it seems like it could fit a little bit under task 1, a little bit under task 3, and also then looking at the pricing for how the cost of this plan development will be passed on? That's also coming to mind as I look at that table of costs, and curious if you can speak to that.
Yeah, so I haven't looked at it specifically for this project, but that is something to look into with the minimum purchase.
As in an adjustment to the agreements are not part of the Strategy 50 effort?
We haven't looked at it directly, right?
To change the water supply agreement is a separate task because it's engaging with San Francisco. So they have to be a partner in that because they're partner in the water supply agreement, so it has to be everyone. So the strategy and just changing those doesn't necessarily do anything to the water supply situation as far as it's a hindrance, but it's not necessarily something that's going to make anything happen. So we're dealing with it kind of on a separate track, because just because you reduce someone's minimum purchase obligation doesn't mean they're going to conserve more or use more recycled water or transfer anything. I mean, there's not a one-to-one relationship there. So that's going along a separate legal path to try to address it, because it's really a legal issue, because it's a contractual issue, whereas the strategy is looking at it more from a water resources perspective, and the agencies working together, what are the opportunities? So both are going on, but they're separate, because one is with BAWSCA and BAWSCA agencies. The other one is a legal issue with San Francisco.
Thank you. I suppose I'm thinking about not the supply side, but the demand side of if in the efforts that the Strategy 50 is looking at, is it looking at the real demand and usage, or is it looking at the minimum purchase agreements and that as a stand-in?
No, it is looking at real demand and real project opportunities. Right. The only thing that looks at minimum purchases is the financial bottom line.
Okay, thank you for that explanation. And two comments. One, really appreciated the comment from Director Weed about PFAS, and would love to see that represented in this conversation, and shaping the conversation we have around recycled water, desalination, other means. And also thinking, I know we just talked about the budget options here. This is a cost being passed on to the member agencies, which will then get passed on to our ratepayers in each city and each agency. So I'm thinking about how this is an add-on cost that we are also passing on that's not reflected in the 9%, but is an additional cost. And I just want to make sure that we're daylighting that, yes, this is a separate line item. No, it's not directly going to the consumer, but it will be passed on in some way.
Okay.
Thank you. To continue on with that question, when I'm looking at the time frame, you're talking about this charge starting in September.
Right.
And I know that most of our agencies have done their budgets and have already looked at their rates and are really close to finalizing what those rates will be for the next year. And I want to know if this has been baked into what we have told our agencies. And you're saying it's a water management charge. I understand how it's being kept separate. What I want to make certain is says will be collected over 18 months. Is that a limited amount of time? Because you said estimated how much would be brought in. But I want to know if there is an actual sunset to this. Thank you.
Yeah, so there is a sunset. We really have looked at what it would look like per month, and it would be a set 18 months. Now, I did a rough calculation of what it would potentially be to have that pass-through cost to the customer, and for each of the customer accounts, it would be about 26 cents per month for that 18 months.
And I guess to answer the other piece as far as budgeting, so, each of your agencies budgets for basically your purchases from San Francisco, and you estimate that based upon your demand, right? Which is an estimate and a guess, and your high and low. This number will be you'll be unable to see the water management charge in the variability that you would otherwise have in your purchases from San Francisco. It's that small by comparison to your purchases. So I think that's an important thing. The water management reps are all fully aware of it. We've shared with them the same information. And the other thing is, since it does show up on your bill from San Francisco, it can be treated just like the cost of water as a pass-through. So again, it's within the noise of your budget going up and down based upon your purchases, and you're able to relay the transfer the cost over directly.
Because I think San Francisco just came out with their number of 8.8%.
Correct.
And I just was wondering if this is baked into that, or
This
if
is
it's
not included in
it's
that.
on
This
top
is
of it.
separate, because this is a separate action from the BAWSCA board that you haven't yet taken.
Director Snyder.
Director Hardy kind of went to where I was. So we've got the 8.8, which I don't think we're approving our budget in a week and a half. I don't think the 8.8 is currently budgeted in. My question is more, in the past when we did this, was it a Prop 218 charge? We don't have to do any Prop 218?
If I might ask Legal Counsel Schutte to address that.
My microphone on? Before I speak? For the, okay. So for you as retail providers of water, these charges are included in your Prop 218 process. However, most of you have adopted a wholesale cost pass-through mechanism, which is permitted under Prop 218. We've advised repeatedly your water management representatives about this flexibility, and most of you use professional entities to do your rate studies. And so you can pass through San Francisco rate increases along to your retail customers, and this water management charge would fit within that as well. So BAWSCA does not do a Prop 218 process. They are not that type of entity. And in fact, San Francisco as a wholesaler is not doing a formal 218 process vis-a-vis the wholesale customers. But you all as retailers are doing one and using all these inputs to make sure that you're following the substantive and procedural requirements of 218.
So it sounds to me like a mid-year budget augment is what it's sounding like to me. If the city's gonna pick up this cost in addition to the 8.8% from SFPUC, our customers are very rate sensitive.
It would be surprising to me if your staff has not already reflected the San Francisco rate. It should be. They've known what it is as a range since January. So, and they've known the upper bound for at least a month. So it should be in there. They all were fully aware of it. It's not a surprise. So.
Okay. Dr. Montano.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your presentation. So I had a question on the purpose and objectives of Strategy 2050, support the identification of 7 key tasks for the SO, which is the scope of work. So on bullet number 2, assess regulatory setting and collaboration opportunities. Who are you going to be collaborating with? And I guess I'm trying to look at the big picture, I'm thinking holistically. Right now, we have in the Bay Area, we have a population of 8 million. By 2050, we're going to be at 10 million. So I'm just wondering, are you collaborating with Plan Bay Area 2050? Because right now we have the ABAG and MTC, they all want the cities to build all this housing. We all have these RENA numbers that were also mandated by SB 35 to build all this housing. However, some of it is really unrealistic. So I'm wondering if you're collaborating with these agencies to factor that in, because is there going to be enough water? So that's what my question is, are you collaborating with them?
Yeah, we haven't established exactly which collaboration we're going to be doing. I know we've looked at a few of them through, one example.
I can't hear you. Can you speak
Sorry,
louder?
the Regional Water Authority, but we haven't established exactly who we will be collaborating with at this time.
So, yeah, I'm just thinking it's always good to think ahead, and,
Yeah.
and I do agree with, the Strategy 2050 objectives are good. We all have to have goals, but we should be collaborating with these other agencies that are mandating more housing. And, every household needs water, so this is just my thoughts. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions from, okay, it's Ms. Schneider again. Okay, any other questions from the board? Seeing none, are there any members of the public that wish to comment? Any other members of the public in the remote site that wish to comment? And the answer is no. Thank you, Mrs. Shorey.
Thank you.
Next slide, please. CEO reports. Agenda item 9, the CEO reports. These reports will be presented at one time by our CEO, Ms. Sandkulla. Opportunity for public comments on the reports will be provided after all reports have been made. Ms. Sandkulla.
I have 2 reports tonight, board members. First, I have a few slides that I put together that I shared with the SFPUC Commission earlier this month, I guess it was, talking about the annual survey that BAWSCA just completed, and its source as it's a valuable and reliable source of data that we use for all our planning purposes that we've actually been doing since 1996, and it's where we document and collect all our water use data, current projected data, population water use source, member agency profiles. So I just want to call out to you that the most updated version is on our website, and it reflects drought conditions. And the reason I wanted to call it to your attention is there's 2 very interesting graphs. So this graph shows water use across the bottom from 1975 to 22-23. So this is total water use by BAWSCA agencies in million gallons per day. The lighter areas are drought years, right? So we're starting in the 75-76 drought. And you'll see the ups and the downs of the blue. And then the orange line on the secondary axis is population. And when you look at it over time, fiscal year 22-23, again, that was our drought year, the region used 32% less water compared to fiscal year 86-87, which is basically our height, despite a 34% population increase. So a very significant reduction on a per person, per account basis. A different way to see that is to look at the per capita consumption. So this is the same data, just showing per capita consumption. So on the left, you've got your per capita consumption in gallons per day. The top line is all water divided by population, or gross per capita, which is, a rough estimate of efficiency. I would focus you onto the bottom line, which is the red one, which is residential per capita. So it's residential use divided by population. And you will see that significant downward trend that has gotten us down to a historic low in the region of an average residential per person of 55 gallons per person per day. Historic low. I looked at some other graphs, and if you go back just before the last 2 droughts, the region's average residential customer used 80 gallons per person per day. So we have significantly shifted the region's use down, a 52% decrease in residential per capita use since 75-76. So I just wanted to call that to your attention because I think it's critically important as we talk about the strategy, as we talk about the importance of San Francisco's water system reliability, and as we talk about demand projections and what are we all going to do. Because the world and what you can do at 55 gallons per capita per day when it's a drought is very different than if you're using 100 gallons per capita per day, right? Just, it's an important component of understanding where we need to go next. Moving on to the Bay Delta Plan. As you'll recall, on September 15th, the court issued its decision and ruled in the State Water Board's favor on all 116 claims in the coordinated cases that BAWSCA had intervened in February 2019. As I think I remarked to you last time, we're pretty disappointed in the decision. It continues to make the water supply that you rely upon from the San Francisco system, it questions that reliability. And so on May 10th, as I informed you, BAWSCA did file an appeal with the court to protect the water interests of the member agencies and their water customers. I think importantly as well, we continue to support the proposed voluntary agreements for the Tuolumne River that are being evaluated by the State Board. That is our primary focus, but this was also an action that we needed to take. As you heard Ms. Castema report in the PUC report, the State Board did host the 3-day workshop. I also believe it was a success from the engagement level of the State Board members. All the board members were talking and engaged. They had questions of their staff. They had questions of the, members of the public that were speaking as well. I thought it was really an excellent window into what we might see as a future proceeding for our agreement as well. The State Board did share a timeline. This is the timeline for phase 2, so this is the Sacramento timeline. And you'll see it kind of plays itself out into the second quarter of 2025, where the State Board would consider adoption of updates to the Bay Delta Plan. Our timeline is a little bit different. We're kind of on a different timeline because recall we have the 2018 Phase 1 update that's been adopted. So the State Board is moving forward, preparing an environmental impact for those regulations. They're also moving forward with considering the proposed agreement for the Tuolumne River and preparing an environmental review of that and bringing those together to consider what steps to take. So that's kind of where we're at on that schedule. That concludes my remarks.
Are there questions from the board on these reports from the CEO? Dr. Miller?
Yes, just one question regarding the per capita water usage. I seem to recall that there is a generally accepted number on sort of the minimum amount of water a human being needs for health and safety purposes. Do you happen to know what that number is?
We have a lot of discussion internally lately on what that is. The World Health Organization gives it a range, and my recollection is the upper end of the range. This is the World Health Organization is 26 gallons per person per day.
Got it, thank you. So it's getting harder and harder to cut that down when we're at 55.
That is definitely the case, right?
All right,
It's
thank you.
not impossible, but it's definitely just harder.
Each marginal decrease is going to be harder, yes. All right, that's my only question, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions from board members? Any other questions from members of the public in this room? Any other questions from public at our remote location? No. Okay, no votes on this one. Next slide, please. Although tonight's agenda showed 3 closed session topics, in fact, we will only be covering the first 2. The public employment issue will be covered later tonight in open session. Before convening for tonight's closed session, are there any members of the public that wish to comment? Seeing none. Any members of the public in our remote location? Seeing none. The board will now convene to closed session. Only board members, legal counsel, and invited staff will remain in the room during closed session. All others need to leave the room, or you'll be able to wait until the closed session is over. Following the conclusion of closed session, you will be invited to return to the meeting. Closed session is expected to take approximately 20 minutes.
We'll make it faster. I think we can try to make it 10.
Okay, hopefully 10, because we may need to extend the meeting anyhow. We'll be taking a short 3-minute break, or 2-minute break, before we start to close session to allow for this transition. So, thank you. And now we turn off the live stream. report from closed session.
Certainly. Closed session concluded at 8:45 and no reportable action was taken. And we are still within the time window to take up the next agenda item.
Perfect.
Although, should we? Okay. Item number 12, agreement with executive recruitment firm. As all board members have been told, our CEO will be retiring effective December 20th, 2024. Accordingly, we need to hire a new CEO, an exercise BAWSCA went through when we hired Ms. Sandkulla in 2013. Consistent with what was done in 2013, I intend to convene an ad hoc committee of the board that will focus on the recruitment effort. Although I was not on the 2013 ad hoc committee, I was a board member at the time. This new ad hoc committee will include board members who were on the 2013 committee, as well as Ms. Schutte, so that we can build upon their expertise and experience in this important matter. Ms. Schutte, would you like to brief the board on our plans, including the requested action?
Certainly. So, given the time constraints and the fact that this board does not meet, only meets every other month, we are seeking approval for an RFP process that we are kicking off now. I've revised the CEO recruitment RFP that we used in 2013 and consulting with my colleagues about the latest and greatest firms that are out there and terms and conditions in those contracts. And we will be meeting with the ad hoc committee next week to review the scope of work and the list of potential proposers that is extensive. Almost at least 20 are on the list that we would send it to and otherwise publicize it. And we are seeking approval for an amount not to exceed $57,000. And these funds are available in the 24-25 operating budget in the contingency fund. And so there would be no impact on the current budget. And so the schedule there is issuing the RFP next week. In early June, the ad hoc committee will receive the RFPs and select a firm and engage with the firm. And then on a separate track, in June at the BPC, the chair will kick off the annual CEO review process, which will occur through the summer and fall to close out that process.
Okay.
Any questions?
Any questions on our process or what we're asking for? Any, okay, Director Dorr.
Yes, who's sitting on the advisory committee for that?
Okay, Director Pierce, Director Vella, myself, and Ragsdale, and Bro. That's it. Okay? Any other questions? Director Hardy.
I will say you get what you pay for, and I think this is a good use. Santa Clara had to go out and get a new city manager, and it was a little bit under this, but close to this amount. And yes, I stole away Tom's city manager, and he's still angry over it, and I couldn't be happier. But the reality is, I'm going to say it, it's going to be hard to replace Nicole, and we want to do the best we possibly can.
Concur. Okay, Director Mellinger.
Just want to echo Director Hardy's sentiments, both on how difficult it's going to be to replace Ms. Sandkulla and on the value of an executive recruiting firm. Sunnyvale is gone through the executive recruitment process. Both our city attorney and city manager retired this year, or city manager is in the process of retiring, and our executive recruiting firm has been tremendously helpful.
Yeah, this is going to be a tough vacancy because BAWSCA is a rather unique agency. But,
right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Any comments from the public? Any comments from the public in the remote location? There's not.
None.
Okay, she said no. Okay, if there's no other comments, please call the roll. Oh, we need a motion.
Yes.
Need a motion.
Thank you.
Anybody willing to make the motion for the recommended action, which is up there? Ms. Ragsdale.
So I move to, board authorize the CEO, manager, to negotiate and execute an agreement with the executive recruitment firm.
Okay, Ms. Matano makes the motion.
Second.
And Ms. Ragsdale has a...
I'll second, thank you.
She'll second. Now, if there's no further discussion, call the roll.
Okay. Andrews?
Aye.
Bro, Chambers?
Aye.
Cohen, Dorr? Duncan?
Aye.
Hamilton?
Aye.
Hardy?
Yes.
Hindi? Jordan? Lopez? Manalo?
Oh, aye.
Thank you,
Aye.
sorry, I was looking for you over there. Manalo, thank you, Jesselyn.
Aye.
Matacek?
Yes.
Mellinger?
Yes.
Mickelson? Montano?
Yes.
Piccolotti? Pierce?
Regretfully, yes.
Ragsdale?
Yes.
Schneider? Stevenson? Stone?
Yes.
Vella?
Yes.
Weed?
Aye.
And Zichterman?
Aye.
And the motion passes.
Thank you. The last agenda item is director's discussion. Board members, do you have any comments or questions that you would like to bring up to the board at this time? Okay, Director Weed.
Yes, I'll make this short. 20 years ago, next month, the board established a $100 per meeting payment for each board member. Under state law, we can increase that at 5% simple interest. So starting next month, with a majority vote of the people in the room at the board meeting, we can increase that to $200. I'd encourage the policy committee to once again look at that as an option.
Okay, any other comments? Do you want to? Okay, Director Dorr?
Yes, I was thinking about PCE as another regional board, and something that I really love about the way that they operate is that they have a citizen advisory committee. And while we can't, it seems like there's not an interest in pursuing hybrid meetings to engage the public more actively in these conversations, I do think it would be interesting to explore having a public citizen advisory committee so more active conversations can be had with community members outside of this board and these more closed meetings. And so that's just something I want to put on the table. I know it's not included, and I didn't advocate for it in this next budget cycle, but something that I would love us to have more conversations about as we move forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Director Mellinger. Okay, I don't know who's first, but.
I
Director
was just
Mellinger?
going to say, I think that is an excellent idea from Director Dorr. I am a big believer in advisory committees as a way to bubble up ideas and help to further engage the public.
Okay, Director Stone?
Just to say I support Director Dorr and Director Weed's recommendations.
Okay. Any other comments or discussion? Okay. Next slide, please. Okay, next meeting. Thank you for attending our meeting tonight. Our next meeting will be July 18th at 6:30 at a different location. Due to a scheduling conflict, the Burlingame location will not be available, so we'll be meeting at the Wind Room, Foster City Community Building, 1000 East Hillsdale Boulevard, Foster City. We are planning on live streaming that meeting to the public.
Yes, I just wanted to clarify, unless we change our rules of the board, these new location meetings will be billed as special meetings, but in all other respects, they are not special. It's the same time and different location, same time, same agenda, but don't be surprised if you see that it says special meeting on the agenda, just as a heads up.
Okay. Any other words? Montano?
Thank you. So I just wanted to mention that most cities take July off. Is that, I don't know. that we
Most cities
do.
meet more than 6 times a year.
So I just wanted to make that comment.
Okay. think we have some important business to do. Okay, any other comments? Okay, without objection, this meeting stands adjourned.